Forget everything you think you know about pirate battles. The cannons, the broadsides, the long duels at sea. The truth is darker. Under the Black Flag, no fight lasted longer than 90 seconds on enemy decks. 90 seconds. A minute and a half. Less time than reloading a musket in a heavy rolling swell. In that narrow window, fortunes changed hands, captains lost their heads, and merchant crews surrendered their vessels entirely. The cannon fire you imagine, the smoke, the thunder rolling across the waves, that was only the overture. The verdict came later, brief, merciless, on a deck sleek with salt and crimson blood. What happened then? To understand it, you must first understand the war that made such savagery possible under the Black Flag. The golden age of piracy spanned roughly 70 years, from the mid-1600s to the 1720s. It was born in the wake of long European wars, when kings dismissed their privateers without pay or pardon. Thousands of trained fighting sailors, seasoned in raiding and boarding, suddenly had no employer, no home port, no flag. They had only their skills, their ships, and their appetite for the taken deck. They found hunting grounds quickly. The Caribbean, with its scattered islands and shallow inlets. The Atlantic sea lanes, thick with merchantmen returning westward. The Indian Ocean, where the treasures of the Mughal Empire crossed open water. Everywhere trade flowed, the pirates followed. They anchored in blood-soaked ports, Port Royal on Jamaica, Nassau on New Providence, Tortuga off the Hispaniola coast. Towns where governors turned blind eyes and taverns took payment in Spanish silver, Portuguese gold, and East India sugar. The prize economy fed them. Merchant convoys sailed heavy and slow, holds packed with sugar, tobacco, silks, and coin. Their crews were small, poorly armed, paid to sail, not to fight. Navies were spread thin across the empires. A frigate might patrol 1,000 miles of coastline. Word of a raid took months to reach a governor. In that vacuum, fortune favored the ruthless. A pirate who read wind and sea grew rich in one afternoon. Yet the battle itself lasted mere heartbeats, a paradox at the heart of the golden age of piracy. Pirates were almost always outnumbered. A typical sloop carried 60 to 100 men beneath the Black Flag. A large merchantman sailed with 150 men, sometimes 200, decks bristling with heavy iron guns. By every measure of master and metal, the pirates should have lost. Yet they took prize after prize. The prizes came in almost intact, hulls unbroken, cargo unspoiled, sails still drawing wind, worth more sound than sunk. How? Not by broadside. Two vessels trading cannonades until one struck her colors, that was naval fleet action. A pirate could not afford to sink his target. He needed the hull to sell, the cargo to divide. Every ball fired into a merchant's waterline was money drowning. Every shattered mast was a prize lost forever. The whole logic of piracy pointed to a different weapon entirely. One not of gunpowder, but of terror. That weapon was the boarding party, and its entire battle compressed into a single terrifying window of 90 seconds. From the moment hulls ground together to when the merchant captain surrendered his ship or died on his quarterdeck. Everything before that window was theater. Everything after was accounting. The broadside duel myth dismantles at the ledger. Cannons frightened, boarders decided. What filled that minute of decision, no legend has ever honestly described to you. The answer begins before a single shot is fired. The chase came first, patient, deliberate, and utterly ruthless. A pirate captain worked the wind, holding the weather gauge, that critical position upwind of his marked prey. From there he could close or break off at will, while the merchant ran downwind with sails near tearing. Pirate vessels were chosen for speed above everything. Sloops, brigantines, small frigates, hulls scraped clean, cordage light. The pirate hunted under false colors: British, Dutch, French, Spanish, any flag that suited the waters he sailed. A merchant sighting a friendly ensign relaxed just enough to lose the vital minutes he needed to escape. Only when escape had already become impossible did the true flag climb the halyard against the dawn sky. The black flag, banner of no nation, no crown, no mercy ever given except by hard bargain struck, raised not merely to identify, but as a weapon: skull, crossed bones, hourglass, bleeding heart, calculated visible terror. It broke the merchant crew's will before a single boarding pike ever left its wooden rack below deck. Fear was cheaper than powder. Fear was the first shot fired in the 90 seconds yet to come. Then came the warning shot. A single ball from a bow chaser, fired deliberately across the merchant's bow. It said, "Heave to, or the next one comes for your rigging." The praise captain had 3 answers. He could fight, if his guns were manned and his crew willing, but few merchants ever chose this. Merchant sailors were not paid to die for cargo they did not own, and they knew it well. He could flee, if his hull was fast enough and the wind fair. Few managed it, in truth. Once the hunter had the gauge, escape became almost impossible under sail, and fortune favored the ruthless. Or he could strike his colors, hauling down his flag to signal surrender to the pursuing hunters. This was, statistically, what most merchant captains did. And most survived. The cargo bought their lives aboard. But if the black flag was answered by a red one, the bloody banner of no quarter, the choice narrowed to a single one: fight or die. No surrender would ever again be accepted. The red flag meant boarders were coming, and every soul on the merchant deck was already condemned. It was rarely raised, and never idly. It meant the 90 seconds were about to begin in earnest. Then the 2 hulls kissed, and the merciless clock started. Grappling hooks came flying first, through smoke. Iron claws on braided line, hurled by the strongest arms in the pirate crew across the gap, biting deep into the merchant rail, the shrouds, and the boarding nets, dragging vessels together fast. They pulled the 2 hulls together with a grinding, splintering groan that no sailor could ever forget. Boarding pikes, 10 feet long and tipped with cruel steel, braced along the pirate rail against counter boarders, opening a corridor of iron toward the enemy quarterdeck where the merchant captain now waited in dread. Swivel guns barked from the tops and rails, small cannons loaded with musket balls, nails, and scrap iron. They swept the enemy deck at point-blank range. They did not aim to sink, they aimed to clear. A single swivel, well-loaded and well-timed, could cut down a dozen defenders in the assault's first heartbeat. That first murderous sweep opened the path for the boarders behind, and now the boarders themselves came aboard. Musketoons carried in one hand short, wide-mouthed muskets loaded with shot rather than a single lead ball. Made for close quarters, where aim mattered less than spread, they scattered iron across a crowded deck. Pistols tucked into sashes and belts, sometimes 4 or 5 to a man, no time to reload once joined. Cutlasses, short and heavy, sharpened for chopping rather than fencing, forged for a deck too crowded to lunge. And grenados, early iron grenades packed with black powder and a burning fuse, hurled into companionways below. They burst below deck to drive the defenders topside, funneling them into the killing ground waiting above. The pirate crew held rolls as tight as any regiment. Every man knew his station under fire. Boarders led the charge, chosen for size, speed, and grim appetite for the wet, close-quarters work ahead. Sharpshooters climbed to the fighting tops, picking off officers on the merchant quarterdeck with long rifled muskets. Powder monkeys ran fresh weapons and grenados forward from the magazine as quartermasters directed men across the rails. A captain, if the ship was well ordered, watched from afar and committed himself only where the balance tipped. The deck itself became a slaughter corridor. Merchant hulls were built to carry cargo, not to fight. Their gangways were narrow. Masts, boats, and hatches broke the deck into pockets with no room for retreat. A defender could not fall back. A boarder could not be flanked. Every pocket became its own grave. Once pirates gained a foothold at the rail, the fight compressed into 3 or 4 feet of splinter planking. Smoke from pistols and grenados thickened. Men screamed in 3 or 4 languages across the choking dark. The clang of steel drowned beneath the crack of pistols fired at arm's length in that shrinking corridor. 90 seconds. That was the window between merchant colors flying and the ship changing hands under the black flag. If the captain saw his men cut down, grenado smoke spilling from his hatches, he surrendered, if allowed. If he refused, or the red flag flew above them, he died on his own deck with his crew. 60 men, 90 seconds, an entire ship changing hands. No long duel, only the corridor and the clock. But what they didn't know was who really led the charge, and why terror boarded before any pirate did. The truth of the boarding party is stranger than steel. Its greatest weapon was never a cutlass at all. It was a reputation, cultivated over years, worn into every sail, doing the fighting before the pirates arrived. Terror, not iron, took most of the great prizes of the golden age of piracy under the black flag. No man understood this better than Edward Teach, the sailor the world would come to call Blackbeard. He was not the deadliest fighter on the account, nor the richest, nor the cleverest, nor longest in command. But he understood, better than any pirate before him, that a battle avoided was a battle already won. He grew his beard long and black, plaited it in braids, tied slow-burning hemp fuses into the braids. When he stepped onto an enemy deck, smoke rose from his face and hair, as if he himself burned. 3 braces of pistols crossed his chest, a boarding cutlass at his hip, a walking theater of dread. And it worked. Across 2 years of raiding the Atlantic seaboard, Blackbeard killed no man before his final battle. He did not need to. Ships surrendered on the sight of him. Governors paid him tribute in silence. Ports opened their harbors rather than watch his colors rise. Reputation was a force multiplier no cannon could match. He was not alone. Bartholomew Roberts wore scarlet coats into battle, demanding surrender with the courtesy of a duelist. Edward Lowe disfigured survivors so that word would travel port to port, carried by mutilated tongues and hollow eyes. Every captain of the Golden Age cultivated legend, and every legend cut 90 seconds of boarding down to none. Cannons were prelude. Fear was verdict. The boarding party often only enforced a decision the merchant had already made. When terror failed, the real horror began. Not every merchant struck his colors. Some fought. Some refused to yield. Some carried cargo too valuable to yield, officers too proud, crews with families in ports they sought to reach. When the black flag went unanswered and the 90 seconds arrived in earnest, cases became legend. Legends became warning. In 1695, Henry Avery closed with the Ganges Hawaii, treasure ship of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in the Arabian Sea. She was larger than his own vessel, better armed, and carried some 400 fighting men aboard her decks. Avery's crew numbered under 200. Cannon fire shattered the Mughal mainmast and burst one of his own guns. Only then did the borders cross. What followed was not a battle in any honorable sense of the word. It was a boarding that ran on for hours, as Avery's men pressed their advantage through the vast hull. The prize was worth £600,000 sterling, the greatest single haul in the history of piracy. It began in a window of about 90 seconds, when the merchant defenders broke and boarders took the deck. 1719. Bartholomew Roberts sailed into the harbor of Bahia on the coast of Brazil under the black flag. There he found 42 Portuguese merchant ships anchored under the protection of 2 warships. Any reasonable captain withdraws. Roberts did not. He identified the richest vessel, closed under false colors, boarded her before warships could answer. In under 2 minutes, his men held her quarterdeck. Fortune favored the ruthless, and Roberts pressed his advantage. He sailed out carrying 40,000 gold moidores, jewels, and chains of gold intended for the King of Portugal. 42 ships, 2 warships, and 1 boarding party of perhaps 30 men. The window opened, and it closed. Edward Lowe, remembered for cruelty in a trade where cruelty was common currency, made boarding itself a ritual. He kept written articles dictating shares of every taken deck, and handed out cutlasses by lot before each assault. He forced captured captains to eat their own ears, burn their own hands, watch their crews cut apart. He was not efficient. He was a warning. Every port he raided sent word ahead to the next. Every merchant who heard his name struck his colors faster. He turned his failures into instruments of future success. 20 men taking crews of 200, 30 men taking fleets, 60 men taking a Mughal treasure. Not battles by any conventional measure, surgical intrusions of terror, resolved in the space of a held breath. One boarding above all defined the entire age. November 22nd, 1718, at Ocracoke Inlet of North Carolina. A cold morning, thin fog on the water. Blackbeard lay at anchor aboard his sloop, the Adventure. He had spent the previous night drinking with a captured merchant captain, confident in the governor's silent protection. He had grown careless. He had grown, perhaps, too certain of his own legend under the black flag. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy had sailed south from Virginia with 2 small sloops and 60 men. Sent by Governor Alexander Spotswood on a mission that was, in all but name, a naval assassination. Spotswood had grown tired of the Golden Age, tired of Blackbeard, authorized without warrant, jurisdiction, or notice. Maynard closed with Adventure at first light, and Blackbeard cut his cable and turned to fight beneath a bruised, smoke-dimmed dawn sky. The first exchange was disastrous for the Navy. A broadside from Adventure raked one sloop with scrap iron and langrage. More than 20 men fell dead or wounded on her deck in a single blast, blood pooling between shattered planking. Maynard, seeing this, ordered his surviving crew below deck, out of sight, playing dead beneath the shattered timbers. Only he and a few officers remained visible on the quarterdeck as Blackbeard took the bait and saw an empty deck. He saw victory. He signaled his boarders and closed the last few yards. The hulls kissed. The clock started. Grappling hooks flew. Grenados burst on the Navy sloop's deck, filling the salt air with choking black smoke. Blackbeard crossed first, cutlass in one hand, pistol in the other, believing he was boarding a corpse ship. Then Maynard's men rose from below, and what followed lasted, by every credible account, no more than 2 minutes. Blackbeard fired his pistol at Maynard and missed. Maynard fired back and hit, but the ball did not stop him. Their blades met, and Blackbeard's stroke shattered Maynard's guard, snapping the lieutenant's cutlass clean at the hilt. Blackbeard raised his blade for the killing cut, but he did not deliver it, for another blade was already moving. A Highland sailor stepped in from the flank and struck Blackbeard across the throat with a heavy broadsword. The wound was deep, but Blackbeard turned and kept fighting. Shot 5 times, cut by later count more than 20. He fell only when his blood was gone, sinking to the boards beneath the black flag he had raised. His severed head hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's sloop as she sailed back to Virginia. A warning. Meant to be read from every deck between Ocracoke and Williamsburg. The Golden Age delivered as a trophy. A boarding party built on 90 seconds of terror had been undone by 90 seconds of staged ambush. His death rewrote the rules of every deck after. Within a decade, the Golden Age was effectively over. Roberts died in battle in 1722 off Africa, killed by grape shot before boarding a Navy warship. The warship had lured him out under false colors of its own. His crew was hanged in unprecedented numbers. Vane, Rackham, Bonney, Reed, the other great names followed him to the gallows within a few years. The trade did not vanish, but its age had passed. The lesson of 90 seconds was not buried. Navies studied it, merchant lines studied it, and new defenses soon appeared on decks across the Atlantic. Boarding netting, heavy rope mesh strung above the rails, made the crossing of hooks and men harder. Marines, professional soldiers stationed aboard warships, drilled specifically to hold the deck against boarding parties from below. Small arms improved, boarding pikes were rethought. Cannon evolved to fire chain and grape into masked men. The window of 90 seconds could no longer be opened so easily aboard the ships of empire. The doctrine of boarding echoed on into the age of sail that followed, written in blood on wooden decks. British, French, Spanish, and American navies fought the fiercest ship-to-ship actions of the 18th and 19th centuries. They fought them with lessons the pirates themselves had written under the Black Flag, in salt and smoke. Nelson himself ordered boarding actions at Cape St. Vincent and at the Nile, echoes of Golden Age tactics. Same compressed terror, same grappling irons and grenados, same reliance on the first shocking minute of contact. The pirates had shown the world what the taken deck could be worth. The navies took the lesson home.
Pop culture inherited the myth, not the minute, a comforting fiction sold across generations of eager readers. The pirate battle became a set piece of long duels, ringing steel, extended broadsides across a shining sea. That version sold books, and later, films, a shape of romance no truth was allowed to disturb. The actual fight lasted a minute and a half, mostly won by fear before the hulls even touched. Boarding netting and butchered surrenders make poor illustrations for a young reader's romantic adventure book of pirates. Admiralties themselves had every reason to quiet the tactical lesson learned by pirates in blood-soaked lawless ports. A handful of ruthless pirates had, for decades, cut through the merchant marine of every European empire. Using terror and a 90-second window, to admit that was to admit a failure of naval doctrine. Easier to remember them as ragged criminals broken by superior arms than as innovators the navies copied. The truth behind the myth was buried under scaffolds and songs, and fortune favored the ruthless still. Yet the 90 seconds remain, stitched into the way any small, fast, ruthless force overwhelms a slower one. They shape every boarding, every raid, every surgical strike where surprise, speed, and terror break the defender, before he can bring his full strength to bear. The golden age of piracy did not invent that shape, but it perfected it on the salt-scoured decks of merchant ships in a window of 90 seconds, again and again, until the black flag was hauled down for the last time. One flag still waits. If you want to know how the captain who out-terrorized Blackbeard met his end, the next video waits. Join the crew and set sail before the next voyage. Subscribe and raise the black flag with us. More stories wait beneath the waves. The tide